From Bloomberg World Headquarters in New York to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power, where the world of politics meets the world of business. I'm David Weston. Former President Donald Trump's second impeachment trial begins just an hour from right now, with the rules now agreed upon and a schedule that will likely take us through the end of next week. To set the stage, we welcome now our chief Washington correspondent, Kevin Cirilli. So what are we expecting here, Kevin?
Well, David, I just got off the phone with a Democratic source who walked me through the procedure, but first and foremost said that Democrats in the Senate, as well as President Biden at the White House, are hoping that this trial, as you alluded to, does wrap up by early next week. They don't want this to dominate the news coming out of Washington, D.C., especially as those stimulus talks continue to intensify. Now, just within the next hour, we are anticipating that the second impeachment trial for former President Donald Trump will begin underway, with each side getting about 16 hours to make their case. Some key takeaways to be looking for, first and foremost, just how united are Democrats in moving forward at a speedy process in order to get this trial wrapped up by, again, early next week. Secondly, the Republican Party, especially lawmakers who are jockeying for 2024 positioning, how will they differentiate themselves on what has been a very divisive issue amongst the Republican caucus? And then finally, there is virtually no chance that former President Donald Trump gets impeached. But even as this happens, I checked in with a source connected to former President Trump's camp earlier this week, who said that their political orbit is still having their eye on the midterm primary races in 2022. They're going to be carefully watching to see where Republicans land in the Senate in the next couple of days.
Okay, thank you so much to Kevin Cirilli, our chief Washington correspondent. We'll be checking in with him for the next 2 weeks, more or less, during this impeachment trial. We're going to welcome now one of those who will be sitting in judgment of former President Trump, Democratic Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland. So, Senator, thank you so much for being with us. Give us a sense from your perspective, will the American people learn anything? Because one of the advantages and disadvantages of this is all of this was done almost in plain sight, wasn't it?
Well, that's true, but I think you'll see the House managers make the case and connect the dots in a way by using the video presentations and the actual language used. So I think you'll see it in a coherent manner to try to prove the case that the president, in fact, incited the insurrection. So I think we all have to stay tuned. I'm a juror. I'm obviously need to watch how this case is presented by both the managers and the president's attorneys. And they each have 16 hours, so they have plenty of time to make their case, and we'll have to see where their presentations lead us.
So as a juror, what will you be looking for? And maybe as important, what will you be looking across the aisle and seeing your Republican counterparts react to? We know what President Trump said. We know what happened at the Capitol, which was horrific for us all. What is the connection that needs to be made?
Well, incitement to insurrection is a very serious charge. And we know that the president was promoting something that was totally untrue about the fraud during the election process. We know that he motivated a large number of people. I think what we're looking for is to see how the president intended the group that he assembled on January the 6th, what action he anticipated. And then I think equally important is what the president did after we saw the insurrection taking place. What action did he take in order to bring order back to the Capitol? And how long did he wait? And was he really encouraged by what he saw in the Capitol itself? These are all issues, I think, that are going to be pretty important as we go forward.
The senators are jurors. At the same time, in a sense, you're also witnesses because you were in the middle of some of what happened when it was happening. As you do look across the aisle, do you have a sense of what Republican senators would need to see in order to vote to convict?
Well, you're exactly right. Most of us were on the floor of the Senate as the rioters were knocking on our door. We were in harm's way. So we saw first and foremost the front line of the attack. So I think I hope that we are not defined by being a Democrat or Republican. This is a constitutional responsibility. There are many who believe the only way you can hold a president accountable for action while he is president is through the impeachment process. So each of us have to make our own judgments. I recognize that, but these are extremely serious charges. We know what the president did leading up to this. We know the way that he was inciting a group. We know the action that he asked them to take. The question is, each of us has to make a judgment as to whether we can, how we will vote on the articles themselves.
Even as you spend the next couple of weeks in the impeachment trial, one of the challenges of the Senate is to multitask, if I can call it that, because there's also the question of the stimulus bill that is pending right now. I know you have particular responsibility in the Senate for small business, which has been a focal point of a lot of the concern with stimulus. What are you looking for in stimulus to help small businesses?
Well, you're exactly right about multitasking. I am the chair of the Small Business Entrepreneurship Committee, and we have a portion of the stimulus bill that we have to finalize during these next few days or weeks. So we have to multitask. It's interesting that $900 billion has already been made available through previous COVID-related packages directly for small business. The priority right now is to focus the aid on those small businesses that really need it. The smaller of the small businesses, those that were in industries that were dramatically affected because of the restrictions on gatherings such as restaurants, and to make sure that we do everything we can to get COVID-19 behind us. That's so important for small businesses to get their customers back comfortable to be out and enjoy our economy and spend money in our economy.
Senator Cardin, as you well know, there have been some who've raised questions about the earlier rounds of stimulus and whether, in fact, it did make it to the smallest and the small business, the people who need it the most. Is this a different approach you're taking this time to make sure that it gets to ones who truly need it?
Yeah, absolutely. We are very much targeting the relief to the most neediest of the small businesses and the smaller of the small businesses. So absolutely, we will be tailoring this next round to make sure we get to those who desperately need this help.
And what about the rest of the stimulus bill? Do you have any pause at all about the size of it, the $1.9 trillion? As you know, there's some debate now among some economists whether, given where the economy is right now, whether that's an awful lot of money to pump into the economy.
You know, I don't. I know that the needs out there are so great. I've looked at each of the component allocations. We need to do more in regards to the COVID vaccine distributions and COVID production of the vaccines. We need to have an all-out effort to deal with that. Our state and local governments are in desperate need. Our schools need to open safely and be able to remain open safely. Just going down the list, nutrition programs need help. The size of the problems. American families are hurting. The direct payment checks will help. The unemployment insurance extensions. All those are critically important to get us out of COVID-19. We're still in the midst of this pandemic, and the impact on our economy is still there. We've been able to keep our economy afloat because of the previous COVID relief package. We now need to finish the job and get this done.
Well, okay, so are you concerned at all about the fact that this is really rescue, as it's called, to get us out of COVID-19, which, as you say, we need to do, but it doesn't get to build back better? I mean, we're really talking about investing in things like infrastructure in order to get the economy, the fundamentals going again. Are you worried that by spending the money now, we may not have it 6 months, a year down the road when we need to rebuild the economy?
Well, we clearly need to rebuild the economy, build back better, and I also say fairer. We absolutely need that. We've been able to get bipartisan support on major infrastructure packages in the past. The committee I serve on, the Environment and Public Works Committee, has reported out in the last Congress by unanimous vote a robust surface transportation bill. I think we can get bipartisan support to recognize that in building back better, we're investing in creating jobs that we've lost during COVID-19. We're going to need that for our economy. So I think it's a different equation there. And I certainly hope that we will be aggressive in modernizing our nation and creating the jobs for the future.
Senator, I want to conclude by turning to foreign affairs, which is another area where you have particular responsibility. You were outspoken in condemning the sentencing of Alexei Navalny, if I can call him that, leader of the opposition in Russia when he returned from Germany. We talked last week with Mikhail Khodorkovsky, another critic of the Putin administration from London, and he said part of what needs to be done is more sanctions from the United States and targeting people close to President Putin. Is he right?
He's absolutely right. Here's where Democrats and Republicans come together in the United States Senate, and that is we want to see stronger sanctions against those responsible for Mr. Navalny's arrest and imprisonment. And you're absolutely correct. Mr. Putin depends upon his oligarchs in order to be able to finance his corrupt government. So attacking the oligarchs that are responsible for this type of behavior in Russia is clearly a path forward that can make a major difference. At the current time, Mr. Putin does what he does because he thinks he can get away with it. We got to make sure he understands that America and our allies will stand up to this type of behavior.
Okay, Senator, it's always valuable to have your time. Thank you. That's Senator Ben Cardin, Democrat of Maryland. And now it's time to get a check on the markets. And for that, we go to Kaylee Line. So, Kaylee, looks like sort of up and down, sort of mezzo, I would say.
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly right, David. We are seeing a cooling down of this rally we have seen over the past week or so, really driven by bets on the stimulus you were just talking to Senator Cardin about. Now, granted, the unwind we're seeing today has come off of its lows. The S&P 500 right now only down fractionally, just about 2 points. It's really the reflation trade that is unwinding the most. Within the S&P 500, it is the likes of energy, materials, financials, those cyclically oriented sectors that are the laggards. ExxonMobil, for example, an energy stock, is down by about 4%. What is outperforming is what you would consider to be more defensive. The likes of tech, the NASDAQ 100 is in positive territory today. But of course, it's not just the equity story that plays into this reflation trade. The bond market is a big part of it as well. And today we are actually seeing yields move lower, so bonds higher for the first day in 9. Yields had been moving higher for 8 days in a row. We're down around 2 basis points or so today, though you can see we are still sitting at about 1.14% on the 10-year yield, which is higher than we have seen really over the past year. Now, another asset I would point you to, David, when we talk about why the equity market may be taking a bit of a breather today, there's a lot of talk about froth, about valuations that maybe are looking a little too stretched. And one poster child for that is Bitcoin. Not an equity to be sure, but still this asset class has really seen a meteoric rise. Of course, yesterday was pushed even higher by news of a $1.5 billion investment from Tesla. That pushed the price of the digital coin above $48,000. It's trading down now back around $46,800, but you can still see it is up 61% just so far this year, which of course has only been a little over a month, David. So of course, rises like this, action like this within the market may be why some are just pushing the pause button for today's session, David.
Okay, thank you so much, Kaylee. Terrific report on the markets. Coming up here, we're going to move across the aisle and hear from Republican Congressman from Kentucky, James Comer, about what we're likely to learn from these impeachment hearings. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. For Bloomberg First Word News, we go now to Mark Crumpton.
David, thank you very much. Following up on what you and Senator Cardin were discussing, the 9 House managers prosecuting Donald Trump will present new evidence in his impeachment trial that's beginning today, including video that hasn't been seen before. Democrats are presenting the charge that the former president incited violence at the Capitol on January 6th. The managers haven't indicated whether they will ask for Senate approval to call witnesses, and they haven't ruled out asking the Senate to subpoena Mr. Trump, who declined their request to testify under oath. A recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic this year, bolstered by vaccine distributions and increased economic activity, will drive growth and lower unemployment. That's according to the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas President Robert Kaplan, who spoke with Bloomberg Television today in an exclusive interview.
It wouldn't be surprising to see the cyclical elements of inflation build. The question for me will be, how persistent is it? And for me, I think the jury's out on that right now.
Mr. Kaplan, who is not a voter this year on the rate-setting Federal Open Market Committee, says Fed policy has been appropriately aggressive during the pandemic, and he did not see evidence of systemic risk. European Union Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell says the bloc must take a firm stance in its future relations with Russia, including through the use of new sanctions. Mr. Borrell's comments come in the wake of the jailing of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny. The EU has imposed sanctions on those responsible for his poisoning, but Navalny has urged the Europeans to slap travel bans and asset freezes on several oligarchs close to Russian President Vladimir Putin. U.S. safety investigators say the pilot of Kobe Bryant's helicopter flew through the clouds last year in an apparent violation of federal standards and likely became disoriented. The National Transportation Safety Board is holding a hearing today to determine what caused the crash that killed the basketball legend, his daughter, and 7 other people in Southern California in January of 2020. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg.
Thanks so much, Mark. Well, as we've been talking about, the second impeachment trial of President Trump is about to start in the Senate, with Americans waiting to see what new, if anything, we can learn about the events of January 6th. We welcome now Republican Congressman James Comer of Kentucky, who sits on the Oversight Committee in the House of Representatives. So welcome, Congressman. It's good to have you here. What new do you expect to hear from this hearing? Will we learn more, we Americans learn more about what happened on January 6th?
I don't know. They've kept it pretty tight. What they're going to try to present in the Senate trial today. But I will say this, from everything that we've learned thus far, I don't believe they're going to be able to achieve their goal of trying to tie President Trump directly to the people who broke through the barricade and entered into the Capitol building.
Well, put aside for the moment the tying of the two together. What do we know about what happened? And more important, what don't we know yet about what happened? Because I think all of us, as we watched those events on the TV, agreed this shouldn't have happened.
Exactly. I mean, I've been a member of Congress for over 4 years. I never thought it would be possible for anything like that to happen. And when you look at who was in charge of security for the Capitol, it was Nancy Pelosi. And there are a lot of different people pointing fingers behind the scenes as to why the National Guard didn't get there sooner, what happened with the breakdown in communication between the Capitol Police and the National Guard. There's some that say the Capitol Police didn't want the National Guard there for pride or for optics. There are others that said that the National Guard was purposely held up. So those are the questions that I think the Oversight Committee wants to know, because we want to know, we want to make sure this never happens again. And obviously we want to hold people accountable for any wrongdoing. I just don't think that there's anything that I've seen thus far that you could directly blame Donald Trump for. Now, they may have some new evidence, and I guess they're going to have an opportunity to make their case over the next few days.
So what are you doing in the Oversight Committee? Put aside the impeachment trial. What will happen in the Oversight Committee, if anything, to get at some of the questions you've just identified?
Well, we're talking to Mr. Sun, who is the former director of the Capitol Police. We're going to be communicating and asking questions to the National Guard. If we have to communicate with people who were in the Pentagon, because it's my understanding that they had to communicate with the Pentagon to get the National Guard in. But this is something that clearly was a breakdown in communications. Clearly, there were mistakes made. There were also instances where we saw where some Capitol Police obviously acted very heroically, but then some, it appeared, let people right through. So we just got to have answers. Clearly, the Capitol Police were overwhelmed, but they clearly weren't prepared for things like this to happen. So we.
Congressman Comer. Congresswoman, I'm sorry. Apparently, we have a technical problem. We've lost Congressman Comer. I apologize to Congressman Comer, Republican from Kentucky. Still ahead, Carrier. Later in the market, we're going to talk to the CEO of Carrier. Carrier ended the 2020 as the best-performing industrial stock in the S&P 500, but the company's fourth quarter earnings have disappointed shareholders. We're going to talk with Dave Gitlin. He is, as I say, Carrier's CEO. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. Our stock of the hour is Twitter as we wait for earnings out after the market closed today. To give us a preview, we welcome now Bloomberg's Emma Chandra. So, Emma, what are we looking for?
Thanks, David. Well, first of all, we're looking at Twitter hitting a 7-year high today, gaining some 3% as we head into that earnings report after the bell in the US. You asked the main question, though, David, with any earnings report, what are we looking for? What's the key metric? And of course, when it comes to Twitter, it really is sales. The majority of its revenues, of course, coming from targeted digital advertising. Now, the reason we need to take a good look at this number when we get that earnings report is that earlier this year, we saw something of a drop off in sales, down close to 20% in the second quarter. This is advertisers pulled back in those early days of the pandemic. Now, we saw sales recover somewhat for Twitter in the third quarter, and we're expecting now for confirmation of that recovery of sales with those fourth quarter results after the bell, and actually expectation that Twitter, David, may post its first its second billion-dollar quarter in terms of sales. Now, it is really important, of course, that we see this recovery for Twitter, because whilst its ad business has been growing over the past few years, it's not been growing at quite the same pace as rivals like Facebook, like Snap. And in fact, earlier this week, we started to see some reports from Twitter about how they may be looking to diversify their revenue sources, perhaps introducing a subscription service of some sort in order to get away from just those purely advertising dollars. We're also looking at we also want to see those sales numbers come back as well, because Twitter seeing something of a plateau in its most valuable market. That's the US. That's in terms of users, younger users, not as turned on by Twitter as they are by the likes of Instagram. So Twitter really unlikely in the coming years to be able to juice the system with just adding more users, especially if those that are younger are unlikely to take up the social media platform. Still, investors like the stock. We've certainly seen a change in fortune when it comes to those shorting Twitter. It's about 8% of the shares outstanding were shorted back in 2018. David, that has fallen by about 60%. Investors still liking Twitter a great deal. And of course, they'll all be watching to see what happens when those results come after the bell.
So Emma, it turns out, as you say, us oldsters are actually the ones who are on Twitter. Our children are all over on Snapchat or something. But do we have any sense of what we would pay a subscription fee for Twitter? I can't quite imagine what it is to say, okay, now I'll start paying for reading tweets.
Well, of course, this is it still seems to be very much in the development stage. Reports by some of our colleagues in Bloomberg that they're starting to think about what they may be able to offer people via subscription, whether this be news, access to particular content, David. Perhaps, again, we might get some more information, more clarity on that from that earnings report after the bell.
Okay, thank you so much to Emma Chandra for that report. On Twitter, our stock of the hour. Coming up here, what will it take to get all the kids back in school? We're going to talk with Dr. Celine Gounder of NYU Langone. This is Bloomberg. It's not what's. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. For Bloomberg First Word News, we go now to Mark Crumpton.
David, thank you very much. Passengers traveling to the UK could find themselves behind bars if they don't follow quarantine measures. The government outlined new restrictions today, including enforced stays in hotels, repeated tests, and threat of fines and even jail. The new rules go into effect February 15th as officials try to prevent dangerous new virus strains from entering the country. The coronavirus is unlikely to have leaked from a Chinese lab and is more likely to have jumped to humans from an animal. That's the conclusion of a World Health Organization team as the group wraps up a visit to Wuhan, China. The team is there to explore the origins of the virus. China had strongly rejected allegations that a Wuhan virology lab caused the original outbreak by leaking the virus into the surrounding community. House Democrats want to limit the next round of stimulus checks to households earning less than $200,000 a year. That's after criticism that President Biden's $1.9 trillion proposal would benefit the rich. Republicans want stricter limits on who should get the $1,400 checks. In Myanmar, police fired rubber bullets, tear gas, and water cannon at demonstrators throughout the country today. Protesters opposed to the military coup were defying a ban on public gatherings. Myanmar's military leader has publicly defended his actions, repeating claims that last November's election was tainted by voter fraud. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg.
Thanks so much, Mark. Just as we're seeing some relief from the second wave of the coronavirus, there's a prospect of a third coming from the variants of the virus that are popping up all around the world. To take us through the science now, we welcome Dr. Celine Gounder, infectious disease specialist and epidemiologist at Bellevue Hospital. Dr. Gounder is also a former COVID-19 advisor to the Biden transition team. So, Dr. Gounder, great to have you back with us. As a scientist, take us through the science. We hear about these variants, as they're called. How concerned are you about them?
Look, we're all exhausted and frustrated. We want life to go back to normal, and we're done with COVID, but unfortunately the virus is not done with us. This right now is the calm before the storm. The new variants are spreading, and they're spreading fast, but there is reason to hope if we take action now. We don't have to let things get as bad as they did in the UK, where they've had to go into strict lockdowns once again.
So when you say if we take the action, what is the action beyond what we're doing already? What more needs to be done?
Well, every single American needs to be wearing a mask, and they need to wear it correctly. And I don't care if you're Tom Brady or who you are. You need to be wearing a mask, and you need to wear it correctly over your nose and mouth. We also need to be sticking to our household bubbles. We need to be staying away from groups right now. Things like online shopping to minimize how much we have to go outside. And I know the Biden administration is interested in doing this. The government really needs to be supporting restaurants and bars and gym owners to close indoor business. These are small business owners who should not be forced to choose between following public health guidance and their livelihoods. This is the moment to be learning from the experience of other countries who were hit by the new variants before us, the UK, for example. And we should be taking the fact that the UK variant is spreading across the United States very quickly now as a major red flag and warning sign for what's to come.
As a scientist, are you getting enough data to judge how quickly the variants are spreading across the United States? I've read that, for example, the UK is ahead of the United States in, I think it's genomic testing or genomic mapping.
That's right. So the UK has been much more aggressive in doing genomic surveillance. So that means looking at the genetics of the virus as it mutates. Since the new administration took office, the CDC has increased the volume of genomic surveillance tenfold. So that's a big increase. That may still not be enough to really keep a finger on the pulse of what's happening here, but that's a huge improvement and will allow us to keep a closer eye on how this is unfolding.
And what about re-engineering or modifying the vaccines to make sure that they can accommodate the variants? I mean, do we know how much re-engineering is required, and how long does that take? Is it being done?
Yeah, I want to be clear that the vaccines we have currently do work against the viruses. The Pfizer and Moderna vaccines that we have here in the United States do protect against the virus or the variant strains, but we do see a trend towards decreased protection. So that is a signal that we need to be developing updated versions of the vaccine, and scientists and the pharmaceutical companies are already taking a look at this and working on it.
So you would know better than I, but we're doing something north of 1.5 million inoculations a day in this country, as I understand it. What do you think that the hull speed, if I can put it that way, of our inoculation program is? How far up can we get that over what period of time?
Well, I think we're going to see a huge increase in supply availability by June, because by then we're going to have a couple other manufacturers likely to be online as well, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine and the Novavax vaccine, for example. And so we should by June have enough supply that everybody who wants to get vaccinated can be. I think at that point it's really going to be bottlenecks around distribution and people wanting to be vaccinated. So I do think we'll be able to get to a few million a day by that time.
Let's talk about the schools. It's clearly a very important issue for parents, but also for the economy itself. We hear different stories about how safe the schools are, whether kids should be back in the classroom or not. I think we're going to hear from the CDC later this week, perhaps tomorrow, about what the guidelines were. What is your take, again, as a scientist, as an epidemiologist, about where we are in the schools? Is it safe to send our kids back to school?
What we've seen is kids are actually much safer in school than they are outside of school. And that's because if schools are provided the resources, the masks, the personal protective equipment, they are given the ability to space kids out, put in the right ventilation, kids are actually safer in school. They're supervised, they're asked to wear a mask in school, which may not be the case out in the community or at home. And so for kids, especially kids in the 8th grade and under, that's really the safest place to be. Now, I will say that the variants may change that. We don't know. But at least for now, the science would say that having kids in school as much as possible is the right thing.
What about the teachers? Because we have, in some places at least, some teachers unions who've really been resisting going back to the classrooms. Chicago, as you know, I think it's been resolved now, but there was a big dispute in Chicago. Are the teachers unions right? Do they have a point, or are they overreacting?
I understand that there's a lack of trust, and I understand that they may not feel safe going back to the classroom. If the schools are given the right resources, the right supports, it can be done safely, even without doing mass testing or providing vaccination. The basics of masking, social distancing, ventilation, all of that can be done in schools and can work well. I do think there are other trade-offs here at play. Especially in school districts where some of the kids are returning to the classroom, some are remaining virtual. That's very hard on educators to juggle both. So I can understand that there are certainly valid concerns around that.
We had a report out that the WHO investigation of the origins of this virus actually are indicating it came from an animal. It did not come from a lab in China. Is that significant for us as we unfold how this develops and therefore what we can do about it?
This is exactly how new emerging viruses emerge, is that they jump from animals into humans. The reason we're seeing this happening more and more is because people are coming into contact with these animal reservoirs more. This is a reflection of changing wildlife habitats driven by climate change, deforestation, and the like. And so as those other processes unfold and worsen, you're going to see more and more of this virus jumping into humans.
Take us out, if you can, and it may be speculation, next year, the year after that. Are we looking at a world in which we get annual inoculations? Is this something somebody said it could be like measles, where you get one when you're a youngster and it serves you through your life? What do you expect ultimately this will play out as?
Yeah, I've actually been one of the people comparing this to measles. I don't think it's going to mutate as quickly as the influenza virus, where you do have to update the vaccine every year. I think this is more likely to be a situation where we may need a one-time update of the vaccine in the fall. I think more likely it will eventually be more like the measles, where once we have everybody pretty much covered with a vaccine, then you're really only playing catch-up with people who are entering the population, which is people being born. So at that point, this would become a childhood vaccination.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for being with us. That's Dr. Celine Gounder, infectious disease specialist and epidemiologist at Bellevue Hospital. Coming up, Carrier CEO Dave Gitlin on his earnings, which were out just this morning. That's coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. Carrier Global has had a great run since splitting from United Technologies last April, performing better than any other industrial stock in the S&P 500 last year. But its fourth quarter earnings per share were less than were expected, taking the stock somewhat lower today. We welcome now Carrier's CEO. He is David Gitlin. So thank you so much for being with us. As I say, it disappointed the street a little bit. You're down a little bit over 5%. Were you disappointed?
Not at all, David. We did exactly what we said we were going to do. In fact, if you look at our guidance that we gave even in the fourth quarter, we beat sales and cash by about $100 million. We did exactly what we said we were going to do on the earnings side. What we were very clear about is that we were going to use the fourth quarter to play offense. We said that we would have 100 million additional investments last year. 75 of that came in the fourth quarter. Half of our CapEx for the entire year came in the fourth quarter. What we were really doing was consciously positioning ourselves for growth in 2021 and beyond. So you look at our 21 guidance, we've guided top line up 6 to 8%, including some benefit from FX. EPS growth 14% at the midpoint, 1.6 billion of cash. So very pleased with last year and very, very bullish on how we're positioned for this year.
So give us a sense of where that growth is going to come from. You said 6 to 8%, something like that top line. Where's that going to come from? How much of it is HVAC? How much of it is residential? Where do you expect it to come?
We really look at 2021 as a tale of two halves. We're very well positioned with our backlog for the first half. So you look at our residential HVAC business, for example, we had the third quarter was up almost 50%, fourth quarter up 25%, and our backlog coming into this year was up 3x over it was at the same time last year. So coming in with very strong backlog on the resi side, we're looking at very strong growth on the aftermarket for our commercial HVAC side. We're going to see a rebound in fire and security, see growth there. And the refrigeration business, a little bit of benefit, of course, from the COVID vaccine distribution, but it's a very cyclical business. North American truck trailer should be up about 40% this year over last. We're seeing great growth in China, so it's pretty widespread. The second half, so backlog in the first half, the second half is we're banking on a release of some of that pent-up demand in some of our businesses that were hit hard by things like retail and hospitality.
Well, let me focus on that specifically here at the end of your answer there. Small businesses. We've been talking about small businesses right across the country. We're talking about right now with the stimulus that's being proposed in Congress. How much is that hitting your business? Because you must have a fair number of small businesses who are your customers.
Absolutely. They've been hit very, very hard. Let me give you an example. You take our security business. We have a business called Linnell S2. Our Linnell business has been doing quite well for some of our larger customers. The S2 piece of that is much more heavily weighted towards small and medium businesses. S2 has been down significantly. Linnell has been doing quite well. So the SMB business hit very hard, and across the spectrum, not only in the United States, but globally, they're going to need government support to get back on their feet. Restaurants, you're going to see it very acutely there. They need the support. You see it in some of the local retail. Those businesses are very much in need of support. But I do believe with government support, vaccine distribution, second half is poised up for some rebound in those hard-hit businesses.
Are you concerned that some of your base of small business would just go away and not come back?
There will be. But, you know, at the end of the day, you take our light commercial business for HVAC. A lot of those businesses that are tied to retail and some other things, those businesses will be replaced by other businesses who will continue to operate the HVAC system and others. So you see that with that business, 80% of our business is based on replacement as opposed to new construction. So those, as customers start to come back, and it may be new customers coming into existing infrastructure, we will start to see those overall businesses for us pick up.
So we've talked about small businesses and coming back in the second half, we all hope. What about other ways in which there may be a snapback? Because there's an anticipation that actually the vaccines will get here, we will get it into people's arms, and the second half may look very different for the economy. Even some concern we may come back too fast, too hard. How will you at Carrier see that pent-up demand, as it were? There's a lot of money, as you know, just in savings accounts right now.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we look at it. I think what's happening across the board is customers are all seeing this pent-up demand and snapback in the second half. So they're placing orders now to make sure that if there's any issues in the supply chain, they have their orders in to protect them for the growth we're going to see. So we saw really strong orders in the fourth quarter. Orders were up 15% across our businesses. Our refrigeration business, for example, orders were up 40%. So we're seeing strong orders. Orders in January were superb. So we're seeing everyone anticipating this overall macroeconomic recovery as we get into the second half. And what's nice to see is it's more broad-based now than it was just a few months ago. Southeast Asia is starting to show recovery. Orders in Europe up 5% in the fourth quarter. So you're starting to get a sense that customers are placing long lead time orders now in anticipation of that second half recovery.
What about China? I know that you've been active in China for a good long time. What is China looking like to you?
We're very bullish on China. I mean, I think GDP forecasts are 7% this year. I think it could be closer to 9%. We've seen outsized growth in China across the board. There's still pockets that are impacted by COVID, you know, up in the northern area, up by Harbin and the Russian border, maybe over in the northeast, over by North Korea, outside of Beijing. But holistically, China's generally open, very strong. And you look at a business like refrigeration for us. If you look at the United States, more than 90% of the meat is distributed in a refrigerated fashion. It's 40% in China. So you look at the amount of smoke detectors, the business in China is a fraction of what it is in the United States. So China's at the cusp of tremendous growth. So as we start to think more about M&A, as we get ready for bolt-on M&A in 2021 and beyond, China is clearly going to be a focus area for us.
We have a lot of work to do to get past this pandemic, but we all believe we will get past it at some point. If you go out 2, 3, 4 years, will this pandemic have made fundamental changes in your business? For example, I'll give an example, air circulation, which is much more of a priority now than it was before. Will some of that stay even after the pandemic goes away?
100%, David. What COVID has done is shined a light on the criticality of indoor air quality. You know, you think about it, you would never eat dirty food or drink dirty water because you can see it. The problem with indoor air quality is you can't see whether or not it's dirty or not. And in fact, we all consume into our lungs about 2,000 gallons of air a day. That's enough to fill a swimming pool. So what's happened now with COVID is what we want to do is give customers visibility into the safety of indoor air quality. So you can see, are the CO2 levels, the VOCs, dirt, pollen, particulate matter, what are those levels? So we're going to be coming out with a new digital product at the beginning of the second quarter that we're calling Abound. It's going to do two things. It's going to give customers visibility into the safety of the indoor air quality, just like a doctor would look at vitals for a patient. A building owner can look at the vitals of the indoor air quality. So first, it gives you visibility. And second is it auto mitigates any deficiencies that you have in the indoor air quality. So this is a trend that's going to be here to stay, and it's actually going to be now accentuated.
So finally, you talked about 6 to 8% growth, which, as I understood it, was organic. Let's talk about inorganic. You had quite a year last year. You now are in a position to really focus on your core business. Are you looking for acquisitions?
We are, and just to clarify, we're actually getting a couple of point improvement from FX. So organic, our sales should be up about 5%. Still very strong mid-single digit growth, and that's what we've committed to long term is consistent mid-single digit growth. So very bullish on that. When you look inorganic, now that we've cleaned up the balance sheet, you know, when we spun from UTC, we had $10 billion of net debt. We ended last year with $7 billion. We should be by $6 billion by the end of this year. We're sitting on more than $3 billion of cash. We project strong cash flow of more than about $1.6 billion this year. So we're poised for bolt-on M&A, and we'll keep our acquisitions in the fairway. We have these two ecosystems we're focused on, healthy building, cold chain distribution, and we know exactly where we want to focus. We're building our pipeline, and you should see more M&A from us this year.
Dave, great to have you with us. Always is. It's Dave Gitlin. He is the Carrier CEO. And coming up here, we're just minutes now away from the start of President Trump's second impeachment trial. We're going to have a live report from Capitol Hill. That's coming up next. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. And for those of you watching on television, we're watching the House managers make their way across the Capitol to go over to the Senate chamber, where they will be conducting the trial of Donald J. Trump for impeachment for the second time, the first time it's ever happened in American history. We'll be covering that off and on throughout the next 2 weeks. And one of the principal people who's going to be covering it is going to be our chief Washington correspondent, Kevin Cirilli. And he's here now to set the stage. So, Kevin, what are we expecting?
Just within the next couple of minutes, we are anticipating a 4-hour debate to begin over the constitutionality of this second impeachment trial. Now, after that debate concludes, there will only need to be a simple majority vote to be conducted to begin the official proceedings of this trial. Democrats have argued that this is well within the Constitution. Some Republicans have argued that because President Trump is no longer in office, that it is against the Constitution. Either way, some storylines to be watching in particular are the comments of Republicans jockeying for position in the 2024 Republican presidential primary. Where will they position themselves? That is one of the key elements to watch over the next couple of days.
Okay, so Kevin, just to be picky here, I don't understand why they have to have another vote about whether they can go ahead or not. Didn't the Senate already vote on this once?
Yes, they did. And to your point precisely, this is largely going to pass, the constitutionality argument of this. Many legal scholars have weighed in on such. You, David Weston, know that better than anyone. And in terms of the actual chances of former President Trump getting convicted, that is virtually zero based upon all of the public comments and back-channel conversations that have been going on. But it does open a political avenue for some Republicans, as has been discussed over the last couple of days, to maintain a position where they can be critical of former President Trump's actions on January 6th, while also getting some political cover and saying that they feel that too much time has passed and that it's just too long have gone on in terms of being able to convict him again. Again, it's a nuanced position. It's a political position, but it's one in this day and age that some Republicans are actually openly discussing now.
And it happens in the winter, in the middle of a pandemic, which means probably there'll be more people watching from home than would ever otherwise watch. So both sides have something of a captive audience.
And two people who will be watching include the current occupant of the Oval Office, President Joe Biden, and yesterday in the Brady briefing room, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki saying that he's going to be keeping tabs on it, but that he doesn't want there to be a long-term trial, and that most of his focus is passing that $1.9 trillion stimulus.
Yeah, exactly. Don't want to forget about that. Thank you so much to Bloomberg Chief Washington Correspondent Kevin Cirilli. Coming up, Balance of Power is going to continue on Bloomberg Radio. In our second hour, we'll continue our coverage of the second impeachment trial of former President Donald J. Trump. This is Bloomberg.